Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
Thank you for joining the Empowerment Zone. I am your host, Ramona Houston. People are always asking me, how did you start your podcast? What's the backstory? So I'm going to give you that story today. My cousin, I have a little cousin back in 2018 who contacted me and said, hey, cousin, her name is Samantha. And she was like, cousin, you need to start a podcast. You do all of this interesting stuff. You go to these conferences I never heard of, and people would really like to learn a lot from you. And so I think you should start a podcast. And I was like, well, what is that? And so she sent me a few episodes of somebody she was listening to, and she just pretty much encouraged me to start my own show. And so if you know anything about me, I'm really like a perfectionist, and I always like to study, analyze, think out all the steps before I begin anything. All of my risks are calculated because I want to win. And not only do I want to win, I want to win the goal. So, I will take a lot of time studying and reading and doing this and that before I make any kind of move. So, of course, if you was what Spade say, study long, study wrong. Of course, if you like me, if you study a long time, you end up it really ends up being somewhat of resistance to keep you from starting. So fast forward to February of 2020, I was in New York City backstage at the Diane Reeves concert at the Lincoln Center. My husband is a musician, and his main gig is Diane Reeves, and so we were uh, in the dressing room, and the pianist, Peter Martin, who is of openstudiojazz.com, and he also has his own podcast, You'll Hear It. It's a podcast with Adam Maness. He was talking to someone about his podcast. So I, heard him talking about it, and then I joined the discussion. And so I was asking Peter a million questions, like how did he get started? What was the process? All these kind of questions. And I mean, it was like a million of them. And then Peter stopped and he said something revolutionary for me. He said, Ramona, just jump in. And then he said, you're not going to figure it all out. Just jump in. And so not only did he give that advice, he testified, giving his own example of how he jumped in. And according to Peter, he said that one day he decided he was going to start a podcast. He went into his studio with his team and he told them, we're going to start a podcast. And they said, okay, well, let's start doing some research and figuring out what we need. He said, no, we're starting today. And so he said he started recording right then and there and didn't know what he was doing. He said he doesn't even go back and listen to those his initial podcast recordings because he doesn't like them and didn't want to get discouraged. And so that's how he started. And so not only did he give the advice, he actually had a story behind that using his own advice of jumping in. So that was my theme. I just jumped in. And so I began with the basics. And so I give this story. I'll tell you a little bit about my process. And I'm giving this story because not only is it a background to the podcast, but it also hopefully will encourage you to just jump in whatever that is that you want to do and accomplish. So I really look at my journey in terms of five phases. One, I started with the basics. So the advice here is start where you are with what you have. So I started with a topic. I didn't have any equipment. All I had was a phone and family and friends, and that's how I started. So in terms of my topic, I kind of figured out what I wanted to do and what kind of message I wanted to give, what type of guest I wanted to have. And so that's how I came up with this idea of the empowerment zone, because I knew I wanted to make an impact on the community, and I also wanted to highlight and elevate the community. And when I say community, specifically the African American and Latino communities. So I determined my topic, and then I just used my phone. That's how I started. And Peter has said that you got a phone, don't you? You can start. You don't need any equipment. And so the phone that I had, I actually I had actually had to have my niece to show me how to do my recording. So that was interesting. And then so I just started building my content library, and my interviews were with family and friends, professionals that I knew, my network. And that's how I started my interviews. And in fact, my first guest was my sister, Dr. Risa Houston, and we had a good time doing that first interview. But I'm s- I've been really really happy with starting with family and friends and within my network, because they really had a lot of value to add. So the second phase was really me creating the brand, and that's where I came up with the description of the podcast, how it was different from other podcasts, creating the cover art, which my tech superwoman did, and then the intro and outro. And the intro and outro, like I said, I use family and friends. My husband's a musician, so he wrote the theme song, and my mother was a speech and drama major, so she did the voiceover. And then I asked around to different people, Peter, and some other people, about what podcast platform to use. And then I registered for the podcast platform. And so that was all about creating the brand. And then stage three was development journey, which, as I stated, that superwoman, Naja, was the one who is my web designer. She really is the genius behind the cover art, which I discussed earlier, as well as the branding and marketing. So she and I really, we were both new to this. So we just met consistently, and it was always a continuous process improvement, which the Japanese call kaizen. And that's what we did. We just figured it out as we went. And that is definitely not me. I like to have everything in place. And I really, really appreciated that journey, because it taught me so much about not necessarily knowing everything in advance, that you can actually learn in the process. You learn by doing. And so stage three was really a development journey. And then for stage four, which um I feel like I finally got in, I'm in it, is the consistency. That I wanted to make sure that I came out with my podcast episodes consistently, and they're twice a week. So just making sure I stayed up on top of uh my content. And so now I'm in the growth phase, which is really about growing my audience and growing my presence. So that's my journey in a nutshell. And I just wanted to share this because I have a lot of people who ask me how the podcast got started. But the reason I talked about the 5 phases is because I think that whoever, if you are one of those persons that feel like you have to know everything in advance, I hope that I am a testimony and encouragement for you to know that you don't have to have everything in advance. You can actually learn as you go. So, my encouragement is that you begin now, use the resources for whatever goal you want to accomplish. Just begin today, begin now, and then use the resources that you have right in front of you. You don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to have a lot of stuff to start anything. You start with what you have. And then lastly, as Peter Martin says, just jump in. So I hope this provides you some encouragement. Thank you.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.